Isabella Rodriguez stifled a yawn as she adjusted the frequency modulators in her lab at the Buenos Aires Institute of Sound Engineering. The clock on the wall read 11:47 p.m., but she had promised herself she would finish calibrating the new sonic detection array before heading home. The gentle hum of her equipment provided a soothing backdrop to her late-night work. The first sign that something was wrong came when her instruments suddenly spiked, their needles jumping wildly before falling completely still. Isabella tapped the nearest display, frowning. In 15 years of acoustic research, she had never seen readings like these. "That's not possible," she muttered, reaching for her tablet to check the backup systems. Before she could access the data, the building's emergency lights flashed on, bathing her lab in pulsing red. The security system began broadcasting an automated message. "All personnel, please proceed to the nearest shelter immediately. This is not a drill." Isabella rushed to the window, her tablet forgotten. The Buenos Aires skyline stretched before her, illuminated by the soft glow of streetlights and buildings. But something else caught her attention, a strange shimmer in the night sky, like heat waves rising from hot pavement. As she watched, the distortion grew larger, taking on a geometric shape. Her phone buzzed with an incoming call. "Isabella, are you seeing this?" James Chen, her colleague from the acoustics department, sounded breathless. "Turn on the news, now." She fumbled with the lab's wall-mounted screen, switching to a live news broadcast. Similar scenes were playing out in cities across the globe. Moscow, New York, Tokyo, London. Massive crystalline ships had appeared above each one, their surfaces refracting moonlight like enormous diamonds suspended in the sky. "I'm getting strange readings from my equipment," Isabella said, returning to her instruments. All acoustic signatures in the upper atmosphere just vanished. It's like something's creating a perfect sound barrier. The crystalline ship above Buenos Aires had fully materialized now, its angular surface catching the city lights and throwing rainbow-hued reflections across the buildings below. Isabella estimated it was at least 2 kilometers long, with smaller geometric shapes orbiting its main body like satellites. "The military's mobilizing," James reported through the phone. "Fighter jets are approaching the ship over New York. I'm patching into the live feed." Isabella watched as squadrons of aircraft approached the alien vessel. Their missiles seemed to pass right through it, disappearing into the crystalline structure without leaving a mark. Even the explosions were eerily silent, visible only as brief flashes of light within the transparent hull. The building shook as sonic booms rolled across the city, Argentina's own Air Force responding to the threat. Isabella's instruments captured the waves of sound energy radiating from the jets, but they simply vanished when they reached the alien ship's perimeter. "It's absorbing all acoustic energy," she realized, quickly typing notes into her system. "No reflection, no refraction, just perfect absorption. That shouldn't be possible under normal physics." A high-pitched tone suddenly filled the air, making Isabella wince. The crystalline ship was broadcasting some kind of signal. As she watched, holographic displays appeared in the sky above every major city, showing the same message in multiple languages. "We are the Crystal Accord. Your world has been chosen. Resistance is futile and unnecessary. Prepare for integration." The message repeated 3 times before fading. In its wake, an unnatural silence fell over the city. No car horns, no distant sirens, no sounds of panic or confusion. Just absolute stillness, as if the whole world was holding its breath. Isabella looked down at her readings again, mind racing. Something about the way the ships manipulated sound waves wasn't quite right. It was too perfect, too complete. And in her experience, systems that appeared perfect often had the most interesting flaws, if you knew where to look for them. "James," she said into the phone, "I need you to help me set up every piece of acoustic monitoring equipment we have. Whatever these things are, however they work, sound is the key, and we're going to figure out exactly what they're hiding." 3 days after the arrival of the Crystal Accord, Isabella's lab had transformed into a makeshift command center. Monitors covered every available surface, each displaying different wavelength analyses of the alien ships. She hadn't left the building since that first night, sleeping on the old couch in the break room when exhaustion overtook her. "Look at this pattern," she said, pointing to a spectrograph display as James handed her a fresh cup of coffee. "Every 6 hours, there's a slight fluctuation in the absorption field. It's barely noticeable, but it's there." James leaned closer to the screen, his eyes narrowing. Could be some kind of maintenance cycle, or maybe their technology isn't as perfect as they want us to believe. Outside, the massive crystalline ship continued its silent vigil over Buenos Aires. Similar reports came in from other cities. The aliens hadn't made any aggressive moves, but they hadn't communicated further either. They simply waited, their presence a constant reminder of humanity's newfound vulnerability. Isabella pulled up another set of readings, these from her modified ultrasonic sensors. The strange thing is how they handle different frequencies. Look here, when we blast them with standard military sonic weapons, nothing gets through. But certain harmonics, she adjusted a dial, and a new waveform appeared on the screen. These particular frequency combinations seem to create micro-disturbances in their absorption field, almost like. A loud bang interrupted her thought as the lab door burst open. A team of soldiers rushed in, led by Colonel Martinez of the Argentine Air Force. "Dr. Rodriguez, Dr. Chen, you need to see this." The colonel connected a secure drive to their main display. Footage from a high-altitude reconnaissance drone appeared, showing the crystal ship from above. As they watched, sections of the vessel's surface shifted and reformed, creating new geometric patterns. "This was recorded an hour ago," Martinez explained. "They're doing something up there, and our science team thinks it's related to these energy signatures we're detecting." He pulled up another file showing massive power readings emanating from the ship. Isabella frowned, comparing the new data to her acoustic measurements. The timing matches perfectly with our harmonic anomalies. Every time they reshape their structure, there's a millisecond where their sound absorption wavers. She quickly typed in a series of commands, correlating different data sets. "James, remember that old paper you wrote about resonant frequencies in crystalline structures? What if we're thinking about this all wrong? What if they're not just absorbing sound? What if they're made of it?" James's eyes widened as he caught her meaning. Like how certain crystals can be used to store and manipulate sound waves, but on a massive scale. He grabbed a tablet and began running calculations. If that's true, then their entire technology could be based on controlled acoustic energy, which means they might be vulnerable to the right kind of sonic interference. Isabella finished. She turned to Colonel Martinez. "We need more equipment. Specifically, we need access to the university's quantum acoustic array, and we need to contact other acoustic research labs around the world." The colonel nodded grimly. "Whatever you need, but make it quick. Our satellites show they're building something in orbit. We might not have much time." Isabella looked back at her readings, particularly the strange harmonics that seemed to disturb the alien ships. Something about the pattern teased at her memory, like a half-remembered song. She pulled up an audio visualization of the frequencies. "James," she said slowly, "does this sequence look familiar to you? Not as a wave pattern, but as something else." He studied the display for a moment before his expression changed. "That's impossible, but it looks almost like musical notation, like some kind of ancient scale." Isabella felt a shiver run down her spine. Maybe the key to understanding these advanced beings wasn't in their technology at all, but in something far more fundamental to human experience. She reached for her phone to make a call she never thought she'd have to make in her scientific career. "Get me in touch with the National Conservatory of Music. We're going to need some experts in musical theory." Professor Miguel Santos from the National Conservatory stood in Isabella's lab, his weathered hands hovering over the holographic display of sound waves. The elderly musicologist had brought something unexpected to their research: an ancient Incan flute carved from bone and worn smooth by generations of use. "These harmonics you've isolated," he said, tracing the patterns with his finger, They follow the pentatonic scale found in ancient music across the world. From the Andes to China, these exact frequencies appear in humanity's oldest songs. Isabella watched as he overlaid traditional musical scales onto her acoustic readings. The match was uncanny. But why would alien technology respond to human musical patterns? Perhaps, James suggested from his workstation, it's not about human music at all. Maybe these frequencies are fundamental to the universe itself. He pulled up a new diagram showing crystalline molecular structures. Look at how their ships are arranged. The geometric patterns follow the same mathematical ratios as these musical intervals. The lab had grown crowded over the past few days. Military personnel monitored communications, while a mix of scientists and musicians worked side by side, testing theories and running simulations. In one corner, a quantum computer processed vast arrays of acoustic data. In another, a traditional Chinese guqin lay connected to sensitive measuring equipment. Isabella turned to the sealed container holding their most precious resource, a fragment of crystal, no larger than a coin, that had broken off during the aliens' initial arrival. Previous attempts to analyze it had failed. The material seemed to actively resist conventional testing methods. Professor Santos, she said, carefully lifting the containment lid, would you play something? Something ancient. The old musician raised the quintet to his lips. The haunting melody that emerged was simple yet profound, echoing the wind through mountain passes. As he played, Isabella directed specialized sensors at the crystal fragment. At first, nothing happened. Then, almost imperceptibly, the crystal began to shimmer. Microscopic patterns appeared within its structure, spreading like frost across a window. James rushed to the monitoring station, his eyes wide. The molecular bonds are shifting. The frequency is causing some kind of resonant effect at the quantum level. Isabella quickly adjusted her instruments, focusing on the exact moments when the crystal showed the most response. It's not just the individual notes, she realized. It's the relationships between them, the intervals, the spaces between sounds. She pulled up footage from the alien ships, synchronizing it with their measurements. Look, their hull reconfiguration follows the same patterns. They're not just using crystalline technology, they're using crystalline harmonics as their basic engineering principle. Professor Santos lowered the flute, his expression thoughtful. In ancient traditions, music was never just entertainment. It was mathematics, astronomy, and physics all in one. The Greeks believed in the music of the spheres, that the entire universe moved to a cosmic harmony. A harmony, Isabella said slowly, that these aliens have somehow engineered into physical form. She turned to the military observers. We need every piece of musical equipment you can find. Traditional instruments, modern synthesizers, everything. And we need musicians, not just classical performers, but experts in every musical tradition on Earth. James was already running new simulations. If we can match their harmonic frequencies exactly and then introduce deliberate dissonance. He paused as the computer displayed the potential results. We might be able to disrupt their entire technological system. Isabella stared up at the main screen, where wavelength patterns danced like notes on a cosmic scale. They had found the aliens' weakness, hidden in humanity's oldest art form. Now they just had to figure out how to turn Earth's musical heritage into a weapon powerful enough to shake the stars themselves. Professor Santos picked up his flute again, this time playing a series of sharp, discordant notes. The crystal fragment in its container vibrated visibly, tiny cracks appearing in its perfect surface. Well, the old musician said with a slight smile, shall we compose something special for our visitors? The underground parking garage of the Buenos Aires Institute had been transformed into an impromptu concert hall. Musicians from across South America filled the space, their instruments ranging from classical violins to indigenous drums. The cacophony of warm-up sounds echoed off concrete walls as Isabella calibrated her measuring equipment. The frequency combination has to be exact, she explained to Colonel Martinez, who watched the proceedings with barely concealed skepticism. We've identified 7 key harmonic patterns that affect their crystalline structure. Now we need to find the right way to combine them. James worked nearby, coordinating with other research teams via encrypted channels. Screens showed similar setups in hidden locations around the world: an underground theater in Tokyo, a converted church in Prague, a desert facility in Morocco. Each site focused on different musical traditions, searching for the perfect combination of sounds. Reports from orbit are getting worse, Martinez said quietly, showing Isabella his tablet. Satellite images revealed massive crystalline structures taking shape above the atmosphere, connected to the ships by threads of shimmering energy. Our best guess is they're building some kind of planetary net. We have maybe 3 days before it's complete. Professor Santos approached, carrying both his traditional flute and a modern synthesizer. The ancient pentatonic scales create the deepest resonance, he reported, but they're too slow-acting for our purposes. We need something more. A thunderous boom interrupted him. The garage ceiling shook, sending dust raining down. Through the ventilation system, they could hear chaos erupting above ground. They're moving. Martinez grabbed his radio. Multiple ships descending to low altitude. They're positioning themselves over major population centers. Isabella rushed to her main console, watching as new data poured in. The alien vessels were emitting powerful energy signatures, different from anything they'd recorded before. Their power output just tripled. Whatever they're planning, it's starting now. Wait, James called out, pointing to his readings. The energy increase is affecting their harmonic stability. The frequencies we recorded earlier, they're amplified. He quickly played back a sequence of notes through the lab speakers. The crystal fragment in their test chamber practically jumped, spiderweb cracks spreading across its surface. Isabella's mind raced. They're drawing so much power that their usual acoustic dampening is weakened. Professor, gather the musicians. We need to record everything right now. The colonel was already coordinating with his superiors. How long do you need to weaponize these sounds? That's just it, Isabella said, watching as the musicians took their positions. We're not creating a weapon. We're creating a symphony. She turned to Professor Santos. The frequencies work best in harmony, following musical progressions. We need to compose something that builds naturally, using every tradition we've studied. The professor nodded, understanding dawning in his eyes. A piece that begins simply, then grows more complex as other instruments join in. Like an orchestra warming up, but on a global scale. Exactly. Each note preparing the way for the next, creating cascading resonance patterns. Isabella began typing rapidly, sending instructions to other facilities worldwide. We'll need perfect synchronization across all locations. The piece has to build at exactly the right pace, or their dampening fields will adapt. James looked up from his calculations. If we do this right, the final crescendo should create a harmonic resonance powerful enough to. Another explosion rocked the garage. Through the entrance ramp, they could see crystalline structures descending from the ships, beginning to take root in the city streets. Professor Santos raised his flute. Then we better start practicing. He turned to the assembled musicians. Ladies and gentlemen, we're about to perform the most important concert in human history. The Earth itself is our concert hall and our audience. He glanced upward, where alien ships loomed overhead. Has never heard anything like what we're about to play. The holographic display in Isabella's lab showed live feeds from musical research centers across the globe. Each window revealed different instruments, different traditions, but all working toward the same goal. In Tokyo, a master played the haunting notes of a shakuhachi bamboo flute. Desert winds carried the deep throat singing of Mongolian musicians across the steppes. West African drums pulse with complex rhythms in Ghana. Look at these readings, James said, pointing to the data streaming in. Each musical tradition affects the crystal structure differently. The Indian ragas create spiral fracture patterns, while the Polynesian chants generate linear breaks. Isabella studied the combined data, noting how certain combinations produced stronger effects than others. The crystal fragment they'd been testing had developed a network of fine cracks, each following the mathematical patterns of sound waves. The aliens are noticing something, Colonel Martinez reported, hunched over his communications array. Their patrol patterns have changed. They're investigating areas with high concentrations of musical activity. Through the reinforced windows, they could see one of the crystalline ships moving above Buenos Aires, its surface rippling like water as it scanned the city below. The alien structures they planted in the streets had grown taller, forming a lattice of transparent spires that pulsed with inner light. Professor Santos entered the lab, followed by musicians from 3 continents. "We finished analyzing the traditional scales," he announced. "There's something remarkable about how they interact." He gestured to a young woman carrying a guzheng, a Chinese zither with ancient origins. The musician positioned her instrument and began to play. The notes hung in the air, clear and precise. James quickly adjusted their sensors to track the effect. Now Santos nodded to a man with a Native American flute. As he joined in, their instruments found a haunting harmony. A third musician added the deep tones of an Australian didgeridoo, and the effect was immediate. The crystal fragment vibrated visibly, its surface dancing with rainbow patterns. More importantly, the sensors showed sympathetic vibrations in the alien structures outside. "They're all connected," Isabella realized, watching the readings. Every musical tradition developed its own understanding of these fundamental frequencies, different paths to the same universal patterns. A warning siren cut through their revelation. Martinez's face went pale as he read the incoming message. "The orbital construction, it's accelerating. Energy readings are off the charts." Isabella pulled up the satellite feeds. The crystalline net above Earth had grown more complex, its geometric patterns now forming what looked like an enormous amplifier array. "They're not just building a net," she said. "They're building a transmitter. Once it's complete, they could potentially affect the molecular structure of everything on Earth." James finished. "Reshape matter itself using their harmonic technology." Professor Santos looked at the assembled musicians, then back at the alien ships visible through the window. "Then we do not have much time. Each group has found their own resonant frequencies that affect the crystal. Now we must compose a piece that combines them all, a symphony of humanity itself." Isabella nodded, her fingers flying over her keyboard. "We'll need to coordinate with every facility worldwide. The composition has to build gradually, each tradition adding its voice at exactly the right moment. If we reveal our full hand too soon, they'll adapt their dampening fields," James said. "We'll only get one chance of this." Through the windows, they watched as more crystalline spires erupted from the streets, their alien geometry a stark contrast to the human city around them. Above, the massive ships continued their silent patrol, unaware that the key to their undoing lay in humanity's oldest art form. Professor Santos gathered the musicians around a large table covered in musical scores and technical diagrams. "Then let us begin composing humanity's greatest work. Not for entertainment or art, but for survival. We must write a piece that will shake the very stars." The Buenos Aires underground facility buzzed with activity as Isabella coordinated with tech teams worldwide. Hundreds of servers lined the walls, each dedicated to synchronizing what would become humanity's most ambitious musical performance. On her main screen, a map showed thousands of green dots representing hidden acoustic transmitters. "London's network is online," James reported, checking off another city on their list. "They've disguised the transmitters as construction equipment. The crystals haven't reacted to them yet." Professor Santos conducted a final rehearsal with musicians in the main chamber, their combined melodies flowing through specialized analyzers. The composition they'd created was unlike anything in human history, a perfect fusion of musical traditions designed to build resonant frequencies in precise mathematical sequences. "The timing has to be flawless," Isabella said, reviewing the deployment schedule. "Each region starts with their traditional instruments, then gradually adds modern amplification. Too fast, and the aliens will detect us. Too slow, and their orbital array will be complete." Colonel Martinez entered with fresh satellite imagery. The crystalline net is at 80% coverage. Engineering teams estimate we have 18 hours at most. He paused, looking at the musicians preparing their instruments. Will they be ready? Isabella pulled up the complete musical score on the main display. Complex patterns of traditional notation mixed with wavelength diagrams and resonance calculations. They have to be. Each group knows their part. When the Australian Aboriginal section begins, it triggers harmonic patterns that prepare the crystal structure for the African drums. Those vibrations then amplify the effect of the Asian string instruments, and so on. A warning light flashed on James's console. Movement above the city. The ships are changing formation. They rushed to the observation screens. The massive crystalline vessels had begun arranging themselves in a new pattern, their surfaces shifting and flowing like liquid glass. Similar reports came in from other cities. A synchronized transformation was happening worldwide. Look at these energy readings, James said, pointing to his instruments. They're channeling massive power through their hull structures. Whatever they're planning, it's starting. Isabella watched as new data poured in from their sensor network. The harmonic pattern of their ships is changing too. Our original frequency calculations won't work anymore. Professor Santos finished studying the readings. We need to modify the composition. Now. The next hour passed in a blur of activity. Musicians adapted their parts while engineers recalibrated transmitters. Isabella's team worked frantically to update their global coordination software, knowing they were racing against time. New problem, Martinez called out. They've started scanning for unusual energy signatures. 3 of our transmitter sites in Europe have gone dark to avoid detection. Isabella looked at their deployment map, watching as more green dots turned yellow, sites forced to temporarily shut down. They couldn't risk the aliens discovering their plan, but every inactive transmitter weakened the potential impact of their musical weapon. We can't wait any longer, James said. The orbital array is nearly complete. If we don't act soon, Professor Santos stepped forward, his weathered hands gripping his flute. Then we begin now. Not with technology, but with tradition. He raised the instrument to his lips and played a single pure note. On their monitors, the crystal fragment responded with a subtle shimmer. Start the sequence, Isabella commanded. Tell every site to begin with their oldest instruments only. No amplification yet. Let the aliens think it's just humans turning to their cultural heritage in a time of crisis. Around the world, ancient music began to rise. Subtle, almost hidden beneath the sounds of occupied cities, but growing steadily stronger. The crystalline ships continued their ominous transformation overhead, unaware that every note played below was another piece of humanity's trap falling into place. In the main chamber, Professor Santos nodded to his assembled musicians. Remember, he said softly, we are not just playing music. We are playing for Earth itself. Let us show these visitors what happens when humanity raises its voice as one. Ancient melodies rose from every corner of the earth, each one a thread in humanity's musical resistance. In Buenos Aires, Isabella watched the sensor readings as the first harmonics began to take effect. Microscopic vibrations rippled through the crystalline structures, barely visible but steadily growing stronger. First phase is working, James reported, tracking the resonance patterns. The ship's outer layers are showing stress patterns exactly where we predicted. He gestured to a display showing microscopic fractures spreading through their test fragment, matching the larger patterns developing in the alien vessels above. Professor Santos coordinated with musicians worldwide, his hands moving like a conductor directing a planetary orchestra. Begin the second movement, he commanded through the global communication network. Traditional strings join with the winds. The sound of sitars merged with pan flutes, Chinese erhu violins harmonized with African choras. Each instrument added new layers to the complex frequency pattern they'd designed. Above their hidden facility, the massive alien ships continued their geometric transformation, unaware of the trap closing around them. Colonel Martinez burst into the control room, his face grim. They've noticed something. Ships over Asia are changing position, moving to investigate the source of the harmonics. Isabella quickly pulled up the orbital feeds. The crystalline net was nearly complete, its vast array preparing to broadcast whatever signal would begin Earth's transformation. They were running out of time. We can't wait any longer, she decided. Initiate third phase. All sites, begin amplification. Around the world, hidden transmitters powered up, magnifying the traditional music into precisely targeted acoustic waves. The effect was immediate. Visible ripples appeared in the alien structures, their perfect geometries beginning to distort. But the crystal accord was not helpless. Energy beams lanced down from the ships, targeting suspected transmission sources. In Tokyo, 3 transmitters went dark. London lost 5 more. The aliens were adapting, their vessels generating new dampening fields to counter the harmonic assault. Their defensive algorithms are faster than we anticipated, James warned, watching their effectiveness ratings drop. At this rate, they'll neutralize our frequencies in minutes. Isabella grabbed the facility's main microphone. All stations, switch to emergency pattern Delta. Randomize your musical progressions according to the backup scores. Professor Santos nodded in understanding. They prepared for this, composed pieces that could shift and change like jazz improvisation while maintaining the crucial harmonic patterns. The music transformed, becoming unpredictable, harder for the alien defenses to counter. A deep thrumming filled the air as the ships overhead began to pulse with energy. The orbital array was powering up, preparing to fire its transformation beam. Crystalline spires throughout the city started to glow with blinding light. Final phase, Isabella commanded. Everything we have now. Modern instruments joined the symphony. Synthesizers programmed to amplify specific frequencies, digital processors that could generate precise harmonic overtones. The combined sound was overwhelming, a fusion of humanity's entire musical heritage focused into a single purpose. The alien ship's surface patterns began to fluctuate wildly. Geometric shapes twisted and warped as competing frequencies disrupted their crystalline structure. But their orbital array continued to power up, the countdown to Earth's transformation drawing closer to zero. It's not enough, Martinez shouted over the rising sound. Their core structures are still intact. Isabella stared at her readings, desperation mounting. They were so close, the frequencies were perfect, the harmonics exactly right, but something was missing. Some final element that could push their resonance past the aliens' last defenses. Then Professor Santos stepped forward, his eyes bright with sudden understanding. Of course, he breathed. We forgot the most important part of music. He turned to Isabella, speaking urgently. Tell every musician, every singer, everyone on Earth who can hear us. Stop following the technical patterns. Stop trying to be perfect. Just play. Play from the heart, like their ancestors did when these songs were new. Isabella looked at her instruments, then at the mighty ships above, and understood. They had matched the aliens' mathematics, but they had forgotten music's true power, its ability to carry human emotion, to express the ineffable, to touch the soul. Send the order, she said. Let Earth sing. The world sang. Not in perfect harmony, not in carefully calculated frequencies, but with raw primal emotion that transcended mathematics. Children's lullabies mixed with folk songs passed down through generations. Street musicians joined classical orchestras. Every radio station, every speaker, every human voice lifted in a chaotic, beautiful chorus of life. In the Buenos Aires facility, Isabella watched in amazement as her instruments registered something unprecedented. The random, emotional performances were creating interference patterns far more complex than their carefully designed symphony. Frequencies shifted and combined in ways their computers couldn't predict. The crystalline structures, James called out, pointing to their monitors. They're not just cracking anymore, they're changing state entirely. Above every city on Earth, the massive alien ships began to resonate with visible waves of light. Their perfect geometric patterns dissolved into rippling cascades of color. The orbital array's energy readings fluctuated wildly as its carefully calibrated harmonics were disrupted by the surge of human music. Professor Santos laughed in delight as he played his flute, improvising with pure joy. Of course, their technology is based on perfect mathematical harmony, but real music, living music, it's about imperfection, about soul. Colonel Martinez's communication panel lit up with urgent messages. It's working. Reports coming in from every continent. The crystalline structures are starting to collapse. Through their observation screens, they watched as the alien vessels struggled to maintain their form. The ship's surfaces flowed like quicksilver, unable to hold their crystalline patterns against the onslaught of Earth's musical chaos. Massive sections began to break away, dissolving into showers of light that rained down like stellar fireworks. "They're trying to broadcast something," James reported, working at his console, converting the signal to audio. A harmonic tone filled their speakers, the crystal accord's attempt at communication. But unlike their previous messages, this one seemed uncertain, almost confused. "How? Your resonance patterns are impossible, imperfect, beautiful." Isabella typed rapidly, correlating data from around the world. Their entire civilization is built on mathematical precision, on perfect crystalline harmonies. They never imagined that music could be more than just physics. The orbital array was breaking apart now, its carefully constructed geometric web unraveling as Earth's cacophony of song reached into space. The alien ships began to retreat, ascending rapidly as their structures continued to degrade. A final message came through, its tone different from any they heard before. "We have encountered many species, conquered many worlds, but none who could turn chaos into strength, imperfection into power. We withdraw, taking with us a new understanding of harmony." Professor Santos lowered his flute, smiling. "They came seeking to perfect us, to reshape us according to their crystalline mathematics. Instead, we showed them that true perfection lies in embracing imperfection." The last alien ship vanished into the upper atmosphere, leaving behind a sky full of crystalline dust that sparkled in the rising sun. Around the world, the song began to fade, not ending, but transforming into celebrations, into laughter, into the simple joy of survival. Isabella looked at her instruments, still recording the complex harmonics of human music making. "We should archive all of this," she said. "Study it. There's so much we never understood about the relationship between music and physics, between mathematics and emotion." Perhaps, James suggested, that's what the Crystal Accord learned today, that there are some equations that can't be solved without adding the human heart to the formula. Outside their facility, the people of Buenos Aires have begun to sing and dance in the streets, their voices rising in traditional songs of celebration. The morning sun caught the remaining crystal dust in the air, creating halos of rainbow light above the city. Professor Santos picked up his ancient flute one more time. "Come," he said to them all. "The Earth has given its concert. Now it's time for the encore."